Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depends on what time zone you're in or what time you're watching this. And I suppose if it's the middle of the night, I should say the good middle of the night to the insomniacs. It's one of the wonderful things about the internet is that we can pass the message along to bazillions of people with very little cost, with very simple setup. We're working on the training of the 12. We're way down into this section, almost ready to put the first half out to publication. Later on, I'm going to read you a sample of how wonderfully enhanced intelligence works out this material to take what Bruce said in 1870s language and put it in 2025's language. It's really quite astounding, and I'm going to share that with you later on. But today, it's a chapter I'm really rather impressed by. I've done a little bit of drilling down on it, maybe a little more than I usually do, trying to understand what was going on in this story. Just a little snippet from Matthew, Mark, and John. Luke doesn't tell this story, but it's just very telling as to what Jesus wanted us to understand. Well, let's get right to it. So we're going to talk about an alabaster jar. And if you know the story, you're going to say, oh yeah, I know what he's going to talk about. So I'll take my phone and I'll scroll through TikTok and see something that'll make me laugh, but I'll pretend I'm listening in the background. I think that there's some fresh insights here that Bruce brings to the table and that I hope to expound and maybe expand on. The situation is this. There's a dinner honoring Jesus held by Simon the leper. We don't know who Simon the leper is, but Simon is known as a man who we presume previously had leprosy. What does that mean? Well, you've seen what happens when people have leprosy. The disease itself kills the nerves, and that means that they injure themselves easily. That's why they have, fingers eaten off by rats in the middle of the night and they don't feel it, and they pour water on their foot and they don't feel it, and it blisters up, and eventually, it doesn't heal because it's a mess. So Simon was not a particularly attractive man at this point in his life, and that probably meant that in his neighborhood he wasn't especially honored or appreciated by a lot of people. We're in this small town of Bethany. It's about 2 miles from Jerusalem, where Jesus is headed. We're 2 days away from the beginning of the trial of Jesus. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because the people who are participating here, he says some things about what he's going to do, but it's all just going over their heads. They haven't figured it out. And yet in 2 days, they're going to start to experience this doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo kind of music in the background as the movie rolls, as we say, oh no, this is not going to end well. And it does end well, but it only ends well because we understand the end from the beginning. But when they're in the middle of it, they don't really see it. But in this situation, these people, at least these people, are at the party. Obviously, it's a party. There's other people. There's Simon who threw the party. Martha is there. According to John, she's helping to serve at the party. We've got Lazarus, who's there reclining at the table with Jesus. And then Mary comes into the story. This is a different story than the one that Luke tells from earlier in Jesus' life, where a sinful woman comes and pours out the perfume on his feet, and washes with her tears and wipes it with her hair. That's a different story, a different event that had occurred, nearly 3 years earlier. Okay, so where do we go here? Well, this act, you know the story. She takes this alabaster jar of perfume and she pours it on Jesus' head. And the disciples say, boy, what a waste that was. And Jesus defends her loving sacrifice. But let's think about the value of that alabaster jar. Do you have a jar of Clive Christian #1 on your dresser? If you do, that 3/4 of an ounce of perfume you can buy on Amazon today. I looked it up and I forgot the exact number, but $750 for 3/4 of an ounce. That's the most expensive perfume in the world. I don't get it. But, no, it's not this most expensive perfume in retail. There actually is a jar of perfume over in Dubai that is valued at $1.26 million. Isn't the internet a wonderful thing? How would I know that? I just Googled it and away I go. this was a very expensive jar. The jar itself was probably made in Egypt. That's where they generally made these things, and it took a craftsman about a week to create the good jar. It's just a jar from stone that's all polished up with a stopper lid on it. And when they put something really valuable in, they, normally speaking, would seal that lid with wax. So nobody had yet smelled what was in that jar. Mary had never smelled what was in that jar. Well, she might have, but my theory is that she inherited it from her grandmother. It was passed down generation to generation. That's my guess. I don't know. I don't know if Martha got one too. It's all speculation. I don't think she bought it for this purpose, because Jesus said it had a symbolic reference for this time in John chapter 21. I forget the reference. In John's gospel, in his version of the story, he tells us that it had a special place in history already. So it's expensive. What's it worth? Well, Judas estimates, and he's probably overestimating to make a point, that it's worth a year's wages. So if you make $20 an hour and you work 40 hours a week and you do the math on that, that's somewhere over $40,000. So the ordinary person would take a year's wages and use it in this way. It's impossible for me to imagine that Mary, in her ordinary circumstances, living in Bethany, could have saved up that much money on her own. I think she must have inherited it, but saw it as tremendous value that she had, that was in her hands. The jar, maybe in today's terms, worth $1,500. The perfume, in today's terms, it's really hard to figure it out, because this nard was from the Himalayas, and it's an extraction process that was very expensive. But it certainly was worth $30,000 of today's dollars. And she wasn't about to use it on her own self at all. So she broke the jar. That's so much significance in that to me. Well, I'll probably get back to that later. She poured it on Jesus' head, and the disciples saw it as a waste. They didn't get it at all. They were doing economic calculations. They had their abacus out and were flipping back and forth and saying, how many meals could we have gotten out of that for on Meals on Wheels? I don't know if they used abacuses, but they quickly were calculating, all the other disciples. Wow, that was a lot of wasted money. We could have done some really good stuff with that. And they mentioned feeding the poor. And it tells us a little bit about the conscience that has risen in their life, probably because of the way Jesus treated the poor people. And Jesus said, get off their case. Well, he didn't say it in those words, but he said, what are you beating her up for? So we've got this sacrifice that she makes. And Jesus immediately sees the parallel between the sacrifice that she's made, and no doubt doesn't have any understanding of the sacrifice he's about to make. But both of them were motivated by the same thing. They were motivated by pure love, both of them. It was tremendously costly, Jesus much more so than Mary, but still high price. And they showed this tremendous generosity, unexpected, undeserved, absolutely decided upon by the giver, Jesus and or Mary. Mary teaches us that love sees what others miss. They see the economic value of the jar. They may have seen it before, on Mary's mantelpiece. Who knows? They just see it as a piece of the economy, not a piece of the value of the stuff, the love that she was pouring out. She figured out how to create a new way to serve Jesus, and she demonstrated that she would act boldly and without fear. She wasn't stupid. She knew that the others would raise this economic question about a better use for the thing, but she couldn't think of a better use or a higher possibility of her demonstrating what she had that was of value that she could pour out on Jesus. And she understood what the meaning of love was, where she gave it all. In the world's terms, they prefer to stay with something more mediocre. Maybe I'll sell it and give 10% of it. Ananias and Sapphira tried that. Didn't work out too well for them, did it? But Mary chose this extravagant devotion to Jesus. And the world, and even in our budgets in churches and Christian organizations. We look at the cost benefit and everything else. And eventually you've got to get to the place where you just throw the alabaster jar and break it. And she gave her all for love. Well, why did Jesus defend Mary? Well, he quickly made the connection between what he knew was going on, the sacrifice that was coming within a week. And he ties the two together and explains to the people in the crowd, as the writers of 3 of the Gospels pass on to us, it had demonstrated Christian devotion. She acted out of pure love. She showed magnificent generosity. She didn't just throw her arms around people and say, "Oh, I love you so much." She actually did something far more important than just talking about it. She did something. Now, I would say, and I agree with A.B. Bruce on this, that perhaps Jesus was implicitly defending his own pending sacrifice. And he could have been asking questions. Why should I weep over Jerusalem? They don't get it. Why do I care about the people who are dying? They're going to die anyway. Why do I care about the people who aren't chosen for salvation? You know, everybody got the aroma. And that's what happens with the gospel. I don't understand the doctrine of election, but what I do understand is the gospel demands that we preach the gospel to all of creation, even though we only know a defined number will respond. Why would I do that? Jesus is defending why he would do that. Why not just restrict his love to those who are going to respond? That would be our natural way, and in some theological circles, that's what they seem to stress. But this love is expressed for all of humanity. This gospel is spread to everything. So when she wastes this thing, yeah, you can say that Jesus' blood was wasted and spilt on the floor, and he didn't need to spill it all. Yeah, he did. And I think that Jesus is seeing the parallels here between her sacrifice and his own. Mary stands for us as a model Christian because she is enthusiastically attached to Jesus. She's free from all the baggage, the rules, the restrictions, the traditions that were all around her, that everybody knew about around her. She had the courage to stand up and act differently. People, diminishingly it seems, are willing to demonstrate courage and get laughed at or criticized for what they do. Just do it for Jesus. That's what Mary demonstrates as a model Christian. She had a noble spirit, far beyond just mundane utility. You know, when you love deeply, hardships don't seem like hardships. The sacrifice, it seems much easier from the outside. They say, "Oh, I don't know how you made such a sacrifice and took on so much ambiguity in your life, and so I don't know how you lived in that culture, these missionaries." They come back and they say, "It was wonderful." Why do they say that? They say that because they were doing it for Jesus. Now, there's a problem with missionary kids. Sometimes they have to take on the parents' sacrifice, and they don't always get the same toys that all the other kids, when they come home on furlough, get. There's a lot of difficulties, but Mary was willing to put it all out there and leave the results to God, and that's what we should do too. There was no simple calculations that could be made for the value of redemption. Love never asks the question, what's the least I can pay to get this thing that they call salvation? How do I squeak into heaven without making too much of a sacrifice? How do I buy the base unit without taking on all the frills and all the extras? No. That's not the gospel. The gospel says all for Jesus, all for Jesus. All my being's ransomed powers. Like the old hymn. Many of you will not know that old hymn, but you can look it up. You can find it real quick if you look for it. It seeks to say, what is the most that I can give to him? The nature of true love is that it is so magnificent, it always appears wasteful to somebody. And you're always going to get criticized by somebody if you do what God praises. You know, this extravagance is the natural language of love, going over and above and beyond. Calculation just eats the lunch of true devotion. Now, quit calculating and say, not what does it cost, but how will it make a difference in the world? Who will it reach? There's always this trade-off of the expression of love with trying to calculate. And I'm not against calculating. Those of you who know me well know that I know my way around a spreadsheet, and I can deal with the stats of things. And I think it's important that we are as wise as we can possibly be. But in the end of the day, it's a risk. It's a risk. It's always going to be a risk that maybe whatever you try will go nowhere. But when you demonstrate the love for Jesus, you're willing to take the risk and put it all on the line. And that's been true with noble deeds down through the centuries, when we're starting with Mary, but going on for many others who've made the sacrifice and never even thought they were making a sacrifice. See, Mary had this freedom in her spirit. She's not bound by all the expectations around her. She developed a brand new, never done before demonstration of devotion to Jesus, and she followed her heart, not just the Constitution, not just the rules. She had the courage to act differently. Maybe Bruce makes this point that love is the mother of invention. I'm going to read something about that for you in a moment or two. It creates original ideas and actions and overflows conventional boundaries. If you look at the way things were done yesterday, you're going to miss how we need to do things going tomorrow. Imagine how you could ever do something like what we're doing right now 20 years ago. You couldn't do it. I started to stare into a video camera probably about 20 years ago, but I knew that it was something that was going to be useful on a broad basis back then. It took me a lot of struggle to figure out how to do it, but it's the yearning within me to send a message out available to all, but only paid attention to by a few. That's always the key. I don't evaluate based on how many people are paying attention, how many likes I've got on the video. I pay attention to the content that some will get. Only a few, but if only a few get it, and then do what I always ask you to do, pass it on to others, and let's tell them to watch the videos and so on, then it can multiply out. If you do the math on that, it multiplies out very, very quickly. And that's the hope that I have, but it's not my part of the responsibility, because I don't know the people that know you. The people that come to your funeral are not the same people that are going to come to my funeral. And I'll know a few of them maybe because I know you, but I won't know them all. But they all know you, and you have influence over them, and you can spread to them the message. And if they pick it up and use it, wonderful. If they don't, so what? Break the jar. Put it out there. Do something that transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Obviously, we're speaking of breaking this stone jar as the sacrifice that's being made here. But the parallel sacrifice is, of course, that Jesus broke his own body for us. And we, in love for him, because of the redemption he gives, are called to pour out our lives and be extravagant and reveal God's heart to others. So the question is, how will you break your alabaster jar? She could have popped the cork and poured out a little bit, but no, she threw the whole works out there, and there was nothing left, not even the jar. It was broken. She gave it all. What a wonderful sample. When are you going to break your jar open? Are you just waiting for a rainy day? Folks, it's raining. This is the time, right now, today, where the message is needed more than it has been in my lifetime, because so few are spreading it out there. Today's the day. And where? Well, there's many places. I don't know where you're going to send out your jar or the ointment from your jar. I don't know. That's not for me to decide. If you want to have a discussion about it, I'll gladly discuss it with you. But it's so important that the church be enlivened. One of the reasons that the church is languishing today, and it's deeply languishing, is that there's no enthusiasm, there's no passion left in the people of God. And sadly, there's very little passion in the leaders. They're discouraged. They're just kind of going through the motions because they don't know what else to do. They'd love to do more, but they don't know what else to do. Here is a story as Bruce told it in his book, in this chapter, and as it is revised by enhanced intelligence. I don't like to say it's artificial intelligence. There's nothing artificial about what I'm going to read to you. But it's enhanced intelligence, and that it took the way that A.B. Bruce probably would say it today and put it into words like what he would say, sentence by sentence, translating thought by thought. And I think you'll enjoy this. It'll take about 1.5 minutes for me to read it for you. This is what the Enhanced Intelligence entitled as a section called Love Makes Us Original. We can learn from Mary's example that love is no less than necessity, the mother of invention. A great heart has as much to do with spiritual originality as with a clever mind. What's needed to fill the church with original preachers, original givers, original workers in the areas of Christian service is not more intelligence or more training or more opportunities, but above all, more heart. When there is little love in the Christian community, it resembles a river in dry weather, which not only stays within its banks, but doesn't even fill the channel, leaving large areas of gravel or sand exposed on both sides of the current. But when God's love is poured out in the hearts of its members, the church becomes like the same river during rainy season. The stream begins to rise, all the gravel beds gradually disappear, and finally the swollen river floods out and fills not only the channel, but overflows its banks and spreads across the meadows. Then new methods of doing good are attempted, and new levels of doing good are reached. New songs are composed and sung. New ways of expressing old truths are invented, not for the sake of novelty, but through the creative power of a new spiritual life. When I get the whole book put together for you, you're going to read paragraph after paragraph of stuff like that will stir you so much that your love level will rise, where you personally will overflow your banks and reach beyond and do things that you never thought you could do, conquering your fears, conquering all the expectations of people around you, making that message as broadly based as it possibly can. I pray that you will do that. And I hope that I'll see you next week.